Welcome to No More Risk. Today I'd like to talk about the 4 types of water-based sprinkler systems: wet, dry, deluge, and pre-action. The simplest, the most reliable, and the most common is the wet system. The piping is completely filled with water all the way to the sprinkler, and when it actuates, it's putting water on the fire. It has the least amount of trim piping around the valve. It will have a means to indicate water flow. It could be a red box on the pipe, or in this case, a pressure switch. One of the easy ways to tell you're looking at a wet system is there'll typically be 2 gauges and the pressure will be very much the same. It has one drawback. You can't use a wet system in an area subject to freezing. So one of the choices is we use a dry system. Now, the dry system has something called a dry pipe valve, where the water is from the middle down and air is from the middle up. When the sprinkler operates, the air bleeds off, the valve trips, and then the water makes its way to the fire. That gives the fire a head start because there is a delay for that to happen, but it's still an effective approach in those unheated areas. The easiest way to identify a dry pipe valve is it might tell you it is one. The gauges will read different pressures, typically about a 3-to-1 ratio. We can see the water pressure is 120 psi and the air pressure is 40 psi. It too will have a water flow alarm to tell us that we have a trip, and it also may have a low air pressure switch to tell us that we're losing some air. But the gauges and what's on the front of it might be all you need to know. Now, the other type of system we have right here is a deluge system. The thing about a deluge system is it has an independent means of detection. It could be heat detection, line-type heat detection, smoke detection, UVIR flame detection, a pilot line of sprinklers filled with air or nitrogen. And whenever that detection system says there's a fire, it will trip the valve and send water to either open sprinklers or open nozzles. The other thing about a deluge system is you can always operate it manually. There will be something that says, in case of fire, push me, pull me, or turn me. Right here and right here. Otherwise, the detection system simply operates as solenoid and the water's on its way. Now, a pre-action system is identical to everything I've said about the deluge system, except it uses closed sprinklers instead of open sprinklers or open nozzles. Otherwise, all the principles of operation are exactly the same. It all comes down to whether you have an open or closed sprinkler. So there we have it, wet, dry, deluge, pre-action. Today I'd like to talk to you about dry sprinkler systems, and specifically the dry pipe valve. Whenever we have unheated areas subject to freezing, we can't use a wet system, and the most common alternative then becomes the dry system. The dry pipe valve is where the air and the water meet. We have air from here up, water from here down. Now, the operating concept is reasonably simple. We have what we call differential pressure. That means less air pressure on the top will hold back more water pressure on the bottom. And the reason is that the air has a larger area to act on. If it was in service, we would see an air pressure of about 40 psi and a water pressure of about 120 psi. What happens when there's a fire is it opens sprinklers on the piping and it begins to lose air. And as it loses air and the pressure drops, it reaches a point where it can no longer hold the water back. And that ratio is about 5.5 to 1 from the water pressure to the air pressure. And at that point, when it can no longer hold it back, the water pressure forces the clapper to the open position. And now the water, with the full water pressure behind it, is headed to the fire area. At the same time, there's a groove in here between the 2 seats that clapper sealed. It's called an intermediate chamber. And the water goes in the intermediate chamber. It actually comes out of the back of the valve, and it goes through a pipe up to this pressure switch. This is our water flow alarm. As soon as it senses water pressure, we're going to get our alarm. Now, the other stuff that needs to be on a valve so that it does everything we need to operate the way I described it, we need an air supply because we need to maintain that air pressure. We need to have an ability to put some water on top of the clapper on many of these valves, and it's called priming water. This is the priming cup. We would actually use this once it's closed up to pour water to this level. There's another valve back here that we can use to make sure the priming water is at the correct level. We obviously need to have a drain so we can drain the system down. There's also an air pressure switch. In the event there was an air leak on the system, we'd want to know about it before this thing tripped. It may or may not have something called an accelerator. What it does is it takes some of the stored energy of that air in the piping when it first senses the pressure loss, and it redirects it into the intermediate chamber to force the clapper open faster than it otherwise would. And then that gets the water on the way to the fire more quickly. So that's the key principles behind a dry system. This lower air pressure holding back higher water pressure until you lose the air, clapper opens, water goes to the fire, alarm rings. The key thing is this needs some tender loving care to make sure it's going to do the job in a fire. There's really two basic configurations of wet sprinkler systems. And today I'd like to focus on the riser check valve that also uses a water flow alarm. Now, the riser check valve is just a check valve with a drain. And we can tell that our water pressure is about the same on both gauges. If we pulled this riser check valve apart, what you would see is there's just a clapper that when the water flows, it lifts up. Now, when it goes past the water flow alarm, if we take the red cover off that box on the pipe and pull it out of the pipe, what we see is this paddle. And when the water flows past it, it lifts the paddle, and that makes a contact here to send the alarm. Now, there is an adjustment screw for a time delay, and that's so that small bumps in water pressure don't give you a false alarm. Anytime you see the water flow alarm, the red box on the pipe, it's a wet system, because every other type of system would have a slug of water going up through that pipe when the valve tripped, and that could damage this or maybe even break it off and plug downstream piping. So you'll only see the water flow alarm, the red box on the pipe, on a wet system. So those are the two key components. To do an alarm test, you would typically go to the end of the system and find the inspector's test connection. It would have a broken off sprinkler head of the same orifice size as what's installed on the system. We also have an inspector's test connection at the riser that has the exact same size orifice as the system, which in our case, it says ELO. That means K11.2 or K160 metric. So when we turn this handle, we're simulating water flow out of any sprinkler in the system, and that should be sufficient to give us an alarm. So let's do it. And there we have our alarm. So now I'll close the valve slowly so we don't trap too much water pressure. And that's it. We have a wet system using a riser check valve and a water flow alarm. We've just done the alarm test by simulating one sprinkler going off through the inspector's test connection. Now it's time for me to go shut the alarm off. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on No More Risk.
We have many types of fire protection systems in the township, one being dry pipe systems. They are installed where temperatures cannot be maintained at or above 40 degrees. One of the ones you'll see often is the Viking Model F latching differential valve. Pretty much just tells you it separates the water and air. This is what it looks like. As you can see, there is an air compressor along with it. At the end of the branches, you have sprinkler heads that when fire starts, blows the valve on it, air is released that's in the system. An air accelerator assists with the rapid water response to the sprinkler heads. This ensures water is at the fire within 60 seconds. When all of the air is purged from the system, the valve will operate, open up, and flood all the piping with water. This will also trigger a water flow alarm, which notifies us that there is an incident. Once we arrive, we may need to shut down the system to prevent water damage in the facility. It's easy to shut it off at the main supply for each riser if need be. The main one will be below the valve. You will also need to shut down the alarms, which are quarter turn valves. One for the air as well. While we may not need to replace a sprinkler head, it is important that we drain the system completely, again to prevent further water damage. Some systems may have two drains that look exactly like this. Either one will work to open the system and drain the water out of it. The rest of this video is to show you how it will be reset in back working order. Plainfield Fire Department will never go this in depth with this system on the scene. Fire suppression technicians require a lot of training and education to be able to put these systems back up in working order. While we may not need to put the system back together, it is a good idea for us to have a basic understanding of the system, of the valves, and all its components. This video goes through each one of these components, describing what it does and how it actually operates. This valve is a Firelock NTX valve created by Victaulic. We're starting to see this a little bit more out in the community as it's a little bit more cost effective to install than the Viking system. It operates very similar. There's air above the valve and water below the valve. The purple indicates the air. Again, you'll notice there is an on-off valve below the dry valve itself. And to the left of the system, you'll see there are two drain valves. Similar to the Viking valve, if this operates, you will need to turn off the main valve below the dry valve. Then you will need to open one of the drain valves and close the air valve supplying the system. At this time, I'd like to take a quick second and review our response policies for fire alarms, automatic or mechanical. Policy 1007 is the policy for automatic mechanical alarms. The purpose is to identify automatic mechanical alarms and its response that goes along with it. Automatic mechanical alarms called in by individuals as well as alarm companies where no smoke or fire is reported. Only the first responding engine and the shift supervisor may respond emergency. All other equipment and personnel shall respond non-emergency unless notified otherwise by command. This policy can obviously be changed or deviated depending on the information given and can be done so through the shift supervisor or district chief. Plainfield Fire Department does also have a cancellation and downgrading policy in the event the alarm turns out to be false while you are en route. Policy 1006, Section B, Fire Alarm Activations. The first two apparatus shall continue to the scene to take information for a report unless otherwise directed by the shift supervisor. The NFIRS narrative should include who you spoke with, what the problem was, and how the problem was resolved, and or how the problem will be handled by the business owner. It is still appropriate for personnel to respond to the station and be prepared to respond. As a side note, if item number 2 cannot be answered and documented in your NFIRS report through the MDT or through dispatch, you should continue to the scene to collect the appropriate information. As one of the videos mentions, these systems are very confusing and require a lot of education to maintain them. A point of note here, alarms are only as good as the maintenance being provided. Our fire inspector, Rob Quist, will make it to every business in roughly 18-month period. This does allow time for some systems to miss inspections by certified alarm companies. So it is really important that we go in, figure out what's going on, and relay this information to the appropriate authority. If you don't know what's up, or something seems like it's off, it does not hurt to send Rob an email. Also, if you are responding to a certain location multiple times within a short period, an email should be sent to Rob Quist so he could follow up with the company or facility manager. I'd like to leave you with a couple thoughts. When our community goes into businesses within Plainfield Township, they expect to go in a safe environment. Although a lot of this has to do with the business owner providing that environment, some of this does fall on our shoulders as a public safety entity providing the services that we do. Although I'm not sure the outcome would have been any different with the Fifth Third Ballpark, but we did respond 6 times in the 2 weeks leading up to the devastating fire. These responses were for unknown fire alarms, which turned out to be some sort of water flow alarm within the system. We don't know much else other than that because there was no follow-up done on our end as a fire department to determine what went wrong and how it was being fixed. We can say that without a benefit of a doubt, an operating fire protection system would have extinguished the fire in the small state that it started in. By properly reporting these incidents, we can effectively ensure the safety of our community through fire code enforcement.